Hi, this is Leonard Kish. I'm here with John Mattison. We're at a blockchain symposium right across from Stanford Medical Center, a place called GSV Labs. You gave a talk today about blockchain and healthcare, and you mentioned 5 key problems that it solves. Can you want to walk through those a little bit? What's blockchain going to do for healthcare?
Well, I think there's some things that are relatively unique to healthcare and other things that are generalizable across all verticals. The first 2, identity management of individuals, documents, things, intellectual property, is the first. The second one, chain of custody or provenance, is the same genre that are cross-vertical.
Right.
So those are 2 big ones.
So supply chain is mentioned, for instance, a lot of times.
Right.
Like pharmaceutical supply chain.
Exactly.
You can irrefutably show, what happened to a piece of product as it came together through a supply chain and where it was and exactly what happened, independent of a third party.
And a similar sort of supply chain, chain of custody will be valuable as we get into a more data liquid environment where there's better sharing of information, because the fact that the best of intentions are involved in sharing information for purposes of research and clinical care does not immunize any healthcare organization from fines and penalties for breaches of $2,000 per patient breach. So having a chain of custody attached to a document could potentially be of significant value for identifying the locus of the breach, so that there's less fear of the misattribution of that locus.
Could it also be a bit of an interoperability layer, because each piece of data has, in essence, its own identity?
That would very closely resemble the FHIR initiative of HL7. And so the atomicity of data that is baked into the FHIR infrastructure is probably a better alternative than blockchain for that particular use case. A couple things I'm really interested in the use of blockchain is being able to restore the agency and the autonomy of individuals to manage their own health and health data, and particularly in respect to personal health records, where there are a number of groups that are looking at and writing code to restore the ability of an individual to manage who gets to see what aspect of the medical record under what conditions and for how long. And, and there's some offsetting issues, such as laws that require that anybody who renders care to that individual needs to, by law, retain the records of what they knew at the time of rendering that care. So it's, the whole concept of ownership of health data is probably not a useful construct. It's more about controlling access. And so those are not exactly equal constructs. But I think that what blockchain does is it provides a potentially much more seamless mechanism for individuals to aggregate the sources of their information and to be able to share that how and when and where and why they choose to, and be much more enabled to have agency over their own data and their own health destiny.
Yeah, I think it's become a little more nuanced, that it's almost not so much about whether you own in a very legal sense. It's about how much you control and how much control you have versus how much others have. Because in the world of yesterday, a lot of organizations, or even the world of today, lay ownership to an individual's data.
Right.
But in a model like this, where it's more distributed, that could change and be more controlled by the individual. But they could be given custodial access or rights, very granular level rights to certain bits of information about a person.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of interest in doing that for many years, and there are many attempts that have never scaled. effectively. And I think blockchain is a mechanism that will help. But I think it's important to really clarify that blockchain is not an ideal mechanism for large volumes of data.
Right.
There are far better ways of storing, large images, CT scans, MRIs, the full genome, things like that. But what blockchain can do is it can be a record of pointers or so-called anchors that anchor a reference within someone's personal health record to the source information somewhere else. There's some excess enthusiasm about blockchain being the health record itself, when in fact it's not a good design fit for that.
Right, and that's what we're doing.
Right.
Essentially, yeah. It's not a very good. It's far too slow for large pieces of information.
Right.
So, but the pointers, so you can actually verify when data transactions happen and who is responsible for the transaction, is of really high value. And as you say, the identity mechanisms. Anything else? I think that's 3 we've gone through now.
Yeah, well, there's some other really interesting potentials for being able to accelerate global sharing of health information while protecting privacy that can be built on a blockchain model. And because I'm at this moment trying to secure the IP for an open source release of that mechanism, I can't. I'm foreclosed from talking about it, but in any detail. But I think there's some tremendous opportunities to be able to really take the friction out of global sharing of information while at the same time protecting privacy.
Yeah.
That blockchain affords it is heretofore very, very difficult to.
And another great example of the open source movement that, it's pretty much expected that everything that people do in this space is open source because it is so nascent. It's still so early on. Everybody wants to share with the value and the insights that others are creating. So.
Yeah, there actually are some pretty substantial initiatives that for more commercialized products based on blockchain. So that's why I'm referring to the era we're in right now as the TCP/IP moment for blockchain, and that is that if we don't have a much more robust collaborative open source fabric, as some choose to call it, that others can build value-added services and monetize them in the commercial market, which is a good thing because it accelerates innovation to have that ability to monetize, and that commercialization allows those vendors who take that path to help support the growth of the open source core. So there's a symbiosis between the open source core and the commercialized innovation that sits on top of that core, and both the speaker today from IBM and I reached the same hunch that we have until the end of summer to really develop a much more robust open source core that will minimize the amount of forking that occurs so that we can structurally engineer interoperability across services, across verticals in ways that otherwise would be forked by multiple commercial products. So there's a real race because TCP/IP and HTTP that resulted in one internet is a relatively rare phenomenon.
Yeah.
And there's reasons why that evolved when it did. We have a similar opportunity now to create that kind of interoperability structurally in the blockchain fabric that may evaporate if the commercialized products fork in too many ways in the near future. So that's my biggest concern right now. And there's a lot of hype around blockchain, and there's a lot of references to it in use cases where it may not be the best solution set. That said, Joyce Searles recently mentioned to me that she believes that blockchain can be thought of as the opposing thumb to the hand that has been built on the internet. And as we all know, one of the primary distinctions between the whole primate line and human and the human species is that opposing thumb, and it's that transactional awareness of blockchain that adds so many capabilities that are heretofore missing in the internet. That is very exciting. So I'm really interested in seeing that open source fabric is mature as quickly as possible to prevent those forks.
We talked a little bit on that panel today that, you know, it's a matter of bringing data, essentially messaging and transactions all together. And that's really, I think, the kind of the core of what's been missing in the internet. And these things have all been kind of disparate before. They've, you know, essentially been in their own different channels. Now this is a way to kind of pull those all together.
Absolutely. And I think that one of the key assumptions is that conventional data storage mechanisms are not going to go away. Quite the contrary. These reference pointers or anchors between the transactions contained in the blockchain and the source information that's stored in a centralized secure database elsewhere requires that those more cost-effective and efficient database storage mechanisms persist and are symbiotic with the blockchain infrastructure.
Right. So what are we gonna do to make sure that all these forks don't happen?
There are a couple of initiatives right now, and there are a lot of the large companies who are so anxious to get started with their commercial products. They recognize the need and the virtue of having the fabric. So bringing them together in a consortium quickly around healthcare use cases and solution sets is critical. So I'm working to stimulate that, and there's a lot of interest. Whether we can pull it off in the timeline that we have available to us it remains to be seen.
All right. Thanks a lot, John. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Right.
Thanks, Leonard.
Thanks. We're at the Blockchain Symposium at GSV Labs in Silicon Valley near Stanford Medical Center. Thanks.